إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار أما بعد. So today inshallah we'll cover the explanation of Shaykh Rabi' bin Hadi Umair al-Madkhali hafidhahullah ta'ala, the great scholar and the Imam, the Allama of this era, amongst the major scholars of our times, in his explanation of Sharh Sunnah. Because we covered the point last week, the point is a very tremendous point, and without having at least some sort of insight into the discussion of Shaykh Rabi' regarding argumentation and Ahlul Bid'ah and so on, I don't think that this discussion would be complete, inshaAllah. So his work is Awnul Bari ببيان ما تدمنه شرح السنة للإمام البربهاري رحمه الله. So this is his explanation, volume 2, and it is point number, with the explanation of Shaykh al-Fawzan, it was point number 80, na'am, and with the explanation of Shaykh Rabi', it is point number 84. Barakallahu feekum, where the author, the Imam Abu Muhammad Hassan bin Ali bin Khalaf al-Barbahari rahimahullah, who died in the year 329, he said, وَعْلَمْ نعم وَعْلَمْ رحمك الله أنه ما كانت زندقة قط ولا كفر ولا شك ولا بدعة ولا ضلالة ولا هيرة في الدين إلا من الكلام وأهل الكلام والجدل والمراء والخصومة والعجب وكيف يجترئ الرجل على المراء والخصومة والجدال والله يقول ما يجادل في آيات الله إلا الذين كفروا فعليك بالتسليم والرداء بالآثار والكف والسكوت. So this is the reading of Shaykh Rabi', hafidhahullah, slightly different wording because of the manuscript that they're referring back to. But he said, Imam al-Barbahari, and know, may Allah have mercy upon you, that there was not a heresy ever, no kufr, no doubt, no innovations, no misguidance, no confusion in the religion, except from the direction of innovated rhetoric, and the people of innovated rhetoric, and the arts of argumentation and disputation and controversy and self-amazement. And how can a man embark upon argumentation and disputation and controversy, yarhamakallah, whilst Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, and they do not argue with respect to the and they do not argue with respect to the verses of Allah, to the signs of Allah and the verses of Allah, and no one argues with respect to the verses of Allah except for those who disbelieve. So upon you is to submit and be pleased and content with the athar, with the narrations, and to withhold from all of these affairs that have been previously mentioned, and to remain silent. In his explanation, Shaykh Rabi', he mentions, so here the author, he warns from the sciences of kalam al-madhmum, from blameworthy theological rhetoric. That which the early Salaf forbade, and that which it contains of harm upon the intellects and danger to the Islamic creed, to the Islamic belief and aqeedah. So much so that Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 204 after the Hijrah, he said that I should meet Allah with every sin short of shirk, lesser than shirk, is more beloved to me than I should meet Allah with ilmul kalam, with theological rhetoric. With theological rhetoric, reported by Ibn Abdul Barr in Jami' Bayan al-Ilm, Volume 2, 192, and also Al-Khattabi in Al-Ghunya, and others like Bayhaqi in Al-Kubra and so on. Then he mentioned that Imam Shafi'i also said, rahimahullah, that my judgment upon the people who indulge in theological rhetoric is that they are to be beaten with palm branches and with sandals, and then they be paraded amongst the kinsfolk and amongst the tribes. And it should be said, meaning they should be called out, that this is the recompense of the one who turns away from the book of Allah and the sunnah of his messenger, and he turns instead to theological rhetoric. Reported by Ibn Abdul Barr in Jami' Bayan al-Ilm and Imam al-Dhahabi in Tarikh al-Islam from the root of Imam Shafi'i, meaning from the change of transmission to Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah. So this should give you an idea of what we intend by ilmul kalam, by theological rhetoric, and that is that which is in opposition to that which Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke with. And it is in essence a means of rhetoric or speech that intends by way of that to argue, to argue with the text of the Kitab and the Sunnah in order to oppose them in the field of the names and attributes and the matters of the unseen and so on. So it is to apply the aql and the intellect and reasoning in contradiction to the Kitab and the Sunnah. It is in essence to give taqdeem to the aql over the naql, to give precedence to the intellect over the revelation. And they are formulations and principles that they set up that are very subtle in certain times and in certain aspects, so subtle that it is difficult for some people to even pick up on the fact that it is an actual opposition. So some people, they enter into ilmul kalam and the ways of ahlul kalam thinking that it is deen. So it was a very cleverly manufactured form of deception that the people of innovation use to oppose the book and the sunnah. So then Shaykh Rabi, he mentions, فَعِلْمُ الْكَلَامِ شَرْ. So the science of kalam, or the science of theological rhetoric, it is evil. And the Salaf of this ummah, that they agreed upon its forbiddance. And they also agreed upon the forbiddance of the sciences of mantaq. Now mantaq is philosophical reasoning and argumentation and sophistry. In essence, it is the formulation of principles taken from the Greeks and the kuffar and the non-Muslims. And some of these shayateen who ascribe themselves to Islam, that they went to a level of sophistry and philosophical rhetoric to a degree that even the kuffar did not reach. And they manipulated it, reformulated it, and repackaged it, and gave it to the Muslims. And much of the ideas of the Batiniya and the Sufiya and the philosophers, that they emanate from this science of mantaq, which is philosophical reasoning, and the sciences of argumentation on the basis of logic and the sciences of logic. So there is a lot of Greek philosophy and the principles of the Greek philosophers that is involved in this. So, such that Shaykh Rabi, he mentioned, so much so, he said, so much so from what I recall from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah regarding this, the mantaq or ilm al-mantaq, or the sciences of philosophical reasoning and argumentation and logic, that he cautioned against it and warned against it severely, such that even some of the sects of Ahlul Kalam themselves would warn against mantaq. So even though Ahlul Kalam are Ahlul Bid'ah, that they entered into theological rhetoric and using argumentation and the intellect to make ta'wil or misinterpret the verses of the Quran and the Sunnah, that mantaq went to a level that was even worse than that. So much so that even the Mu'tazila warned against them. As Shaykh Rabi mentioned, Wallahu A'lam. Then in the footnote he mentions the actual statement of the actual statement of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, where Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said, to just paraphrase, that he mentioned here that those who protected Islam and the vanguards of the Muslims have not ceased to write against them, meaning against the people of mantaq, in the issue of this philosophical sophistry and argumentation that is based upon logic and logic of the Greeks and so on. And they clarified their errors in that which they stated concerning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and establishing a had for Allah, limitations around Allah. And other than that, from the affairs of qiyas with regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and using analogies and so on. And with regard to the Godship and the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the Muslimin and those who defended Islam, that they refuted them in these affairs. And none from the Muslims and from those who protected Islam from the Muslims even looked and even glanced towards the path of the people of mantaq. And indeed, even the Mu'tazila, even the Asha'ira, even the Karramiyya and the Shia, and the rest of the deviated, circumspect factions would criticize this affair. They would criticize it and affirm its corruption. So anyway, he mentioned thereafter, and I'll paraphrase what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said, that the first individual to mix their philosophies of reasoning, their philosophical reasoning, their mantaq and their logic with the usul and the foundations of Islam was Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And the ulama, they spoke concerning him. They spoke concerning Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and you say a lot of the Sufis and so on saying Imam al-Ghazali, Imam al-Ghazali. This is the Ghazali from the olden times. I think he died in the 5th century after the Hijrah. That Imam al-Ghazali, Abu Hamid, that he was the first one to introduce, to mix their philosophies of mantaq, of philosophical reasoning and logic, with the foundations of Islam. He was the first. And the ulama, they criticized him with lengthy speech with regard to his deviations in this regard. Then Shaykh Rabi mentions, and Allah knows best, he said up until, after mentioning the affair of mantaq, he said up until Ghazali came along, who perpetrated a crime upon Islam by introducing the affair of philosophical sophistry and philosophical reasoning and logic into the sciences of Islam. Into the sciences of Islam. And then, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, in his Rad al-Mantaqiyin, that he mentions with regard to Imam al-Ghazali, that he refutes him, and he mentions how Imam al-Ghazali, or as they refer to him as Imam al-Ghazali, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, that the usage of philosophical rhetoric and logic increased in the era of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, because he was the one to introduce the affair of mantaq in the first of his books, Al-Mustafa. And he claimed that a person's knowledge cannot be relied upon up until, except for the one who has knowledge of this mantaq, of this philosophical logic and reasoning that they glean and they took from the non-Muslims, from the Greek philosophers and so on. So Shaykh Rabi, he mentioned, so that he, meaning Al-Ghazali, he entered at-tasawwuf or Sufism upon the fuqaha, upon the jurists. And this man, meaning Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he left behind him in his wake a great amount of evil upon the ummah, upon the Muslim ummah, in his writings and in his authorships. And from his authorships is Al-Ihya, meaning Al-Ihya Ulumuddin, which is a famous book that you find every Sufi who is worth his weight, that you find all of them reading this book, Al-Ihya Ulumuddin. And from his books, Al-Ma'ani, and he mentions others from his works. He said, in these books, there are lies upon Allah, from misguidance and heresy, that none knows except for Allah the extent of them, extent of that heresy and misguidance in the works of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. And he mentioned that many of the people, even from his own students, even from the Ash'aris, from the Asha'ira, that they would warn against his books. And especially the book Al-Ihya Ulumuddin, Al-Ihya Ulumuddin, which is his monumental work of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, translated into many, many languages, freely available from the bookstores of the people of misguidance and bid'ah. So, especially that book, Al-Ihya, which is one of the standards texts of the Sufis, because it contains, as Shaykh Rabi mentions, it contains more deception. Even though he has books that are worse than this, but this is more deceptive, because of the fact that this book cloaks itself with Islam more than the other books. So it cloaks itself with Islam more than the other books. Because within this book, Ihya, you will find a hadith. He quotes hadith. And he brings fiqh opinions. And he brings issues of aqeedah. And there are oppositions within it that are terrible and despicable in opposition to the haqq. So upon reading it, even the Asha'ira and the Ash'aris became enraged with him. And from them, who were angry with him and opposed him with these books, were even his own students. And they waged a war against him, a severe war against Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and especially from those who lived in the Maghrib al-Arabi, meaning in the region of Morocco and that era of that region of North Africa, that they refuted him severely. Na'am. Such that even his books were burned due to what they contained of misguidance and evil. He said anyway, the point here being that Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he beautified the sciences of logic and reasoning. And he entered them into the sciences of the usul of the deen itself. So he brought it and he merged them together. So he entered mantaq and philosophical reasoning and logic into the Islamic sciences. And as it is said, that due to this, and with great regret, he started this evil sunnah of philosophical reasoning and logic in opposition to the Kitab and the Sunnah, and in fact in destruction of the Kitab and the Sunnah. And then he said, and then there came Al-Amidi. Al-Amidi. And he devoted himself also to mantaq. He devoted himself to this science of philosophical logic and reasoning, learning the sciences of argumentation and disputation and debating, in opposition to the textual evidences and with regard to those affairs of the unseen, such as the dhat of Allah, the self of Allah, and the attributes of Allah, and so on. And in essence, against the whole of the religion. This Al-Amidi, that he was from the contemporaries of the great Imam Ibn Salah, the great Imam of Hadith and Sunnah, Ibn Salah. And this Amidi, he devoted himself to mantaq and also to fiqh, to Islamic jurisprudence, and to the usul of fiqh, and other than that. And he has some writings and some authorships, and from them is Al-Ihkam fi Usul Al-Ahkam. And this is a work that even it is read till this day and studied till this day in Usul Al-Fiqh, and it is strong in Usul Al-Fiqh. However, he devoted himself to philosophy and to the sciences of the philosophers, and from that was logic, mantaq. And he himself established, this Amidi, established a school, a madrasa, or an institution of learning. So Ibn Salah, the great Imam, the scholar of Hadith, and he has tremendous works in the sciences of Hadith, that he waged a war, Ibn Salah, against Al-Amidi, such that he expelled him from his own madrasa that he set up. He expelled him from it. And when he expelled him from it, he said, Wallahi, he said, by Allah, removing him and expelling him from that madrasa, from that institute of learning, and that school that he has set up, is more beloved to me than the conquest of Akka, which is a port town in Palestine. He said, it is more beloved to me than the conquest of Akka, or modern day I think it's called Acre. It's a port town in Sham or in Palestine. He said, Sheikh Rabi mentioned that Akka was a town that was conquered by the Christians during the Crusades. When the Christians went into the Middle East, or they went into Sham and to Jerusalem and Palestine and all that region that is now commonly known as Palestine and Jordan and Syria and so on, when the Crusaders entered into it after the 11th century in the Christian era, that from the towns that they conquered was Akka. So it was conquered by the crusading Christians, and the Muslims, they waged a jihad against them. And they continued in their jihad, and they strove to free it from the hands of the Christians, from the Christian crusaders, but they were unable to do so. So every time they tried, they could not defeat the Christian crusaders. So it was concerning that Ibn Salah, he said, by Allah, removing and throwing out Al-Amidi from this madrasa, from his institute of learning, is more beloved to me than the conquest of Akka. So Ibn Salah, Shaykh Rabi mentions that Ibn Salah rahimahullah, as Imam Dhahabi stated, that he was a person who traversed upon the path of the Salaf. As Imam Dhahabi said in Tarikh al-Islam, volume 47, he said that Imam Dhahabi said about Ibn Salah that his aqeedah was sound and good, and he was upon the madhab of the Salaf. And he saw that one should withhold from making ta'wil, meaning regarding the ayah, regarding the attributes of Allah, that one should withhold from misinterpreting them and explaining them away. And he believed in that which came from Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon the intent of Allah and the intent of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ regarding the attributes of Allah and regarding the text generally. And he would not enter into vain discourse, nor would he delve deeply into affairs beyond their limits, meaning beyond that which is allowed in the Sharia. So that is this Ibn Salah. So Shaykh Rabi, Hafidhullah, he said, even so, there is no doubt that there were some affairs from the manhaj of the Salaf that missed him, that passed him by, that he did not reach. He said, however, nevertheless, even having said that about him, he said he had a great jealousy for the Sunnah. And he would take people to account due to the Sunnah, rahimahullah. He said, however, because of the fact that in his time that the madhab of the Ash'ari, or the Ash'ari madhab, that it was widespread in the time of Ibn Salah, he said that it is possible that some of the affairs of the actual affairs of the Salaf with regard to what the Salaf were upon were obscure to him. And he said that is possible. But nevertheless, he was sincere for the deen of Allah. And he was ardent regarding the sunnah of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he was jealous regarding it and a defender of the sunnah rahimahullah. And for this reason, Imam Dhahabi rahimahullah described him with these words, that he traversed and he proceeded upon the tariqatul salaf, upon the path of the salaf. Na'am. And he mentioned, and from his traversing the path of the salaf was his waging war against Ahlul Bid'ah. And from that was the war that he waged against this Al-Amidi. So now he said, in our times, that this Amidi, look at him in the times that we live in now. This Amidi now is considered by the people to be an imam from the imams of Islam. This Amidi. Yet, this Rajul, meaning this man, this Imam Ibn Salah said about him, this Rajul Salafi. Look what he said about this Amidi that many of the people regard to be an Imam in our times. He said, by Allah, that he should be removed from this madrasa is more beloved to me than the conquest and the reappropriation of Akka. Shaykh Rabi said, how is that? And who will comprehend these words of Ibn Salah? He said, this Ahmadi, when he entered into the sciences of philosophy, and he entered his innovations into this madrasa, then he corrupted the Islamic lands far greater than the corruption that came about by the appropriation or the misappropriation of the Christians of Akka. So the greater corruption came about by the Institute of Learning of Ahmadi, greater than the corruption of the Christian crusaders who took this port town of Akka. And then he mentioned, Shaykh Rabi', and the harm that came about upon the Muslims by the capture of the port town of Akka is lesser than the corruption that came about by the bid'ah and the spreading of the innovation of Al-Amadi. He said, this is from the fiqh of the Salaf. This is from the understanding of the Salaf. And their comprehension of the dangers of bid'ah. Na'am. And before him, meaning before the coming of Ibn Salah, rahimahullah, that the Salaf, they comprehended the harm and the dangers of ilmul kalam, of theological rhetoric, which comes about and its purpose is to oppose the textual proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah, especially when it comes to the names and attributes of Allah and with regard to the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the self of Allah. So, na'am, that he, meaning Al-Amadi, that he inherited these doubts and these confusions and this kufr and this heresy from the people of Kalam. So he mentioned that the one who studies the sciences of rhetoric, and he studies the foundations of rhetoric, and the principles of rhetoric, and the proofs that they utilize for the establishment of theological rhetoric and argumentation to oppose the Quranic and the Shari'i texts and the Sunnah texts, then he will enter and he will fall into doubt and he will fall into confusion. And Shaykh Rabi, he mentioned that, and I knew two men of this time, two individuals in this time of ours, and both of them were from Al-Azhar University in Egypt, in Cairo. And both of them mentioned to me that they lived for 20 years in confusion and doubts and deviation. Both of them. And this was because of Ilmul Kalam and because of the teachings of Ghazali and their likes. And then he continues with regard to that. But then he mentions, so he mentions that, and I've just paraphrased that particular part of what Shaykh Rabi has mentioned. And he's mentioned that it's no surprise, because even Sayyid Qutb, that he lived the whole of his life upon doubt and ambiguities and in confusion. And he said that I believe and I think that the reason was that because of Ilmul Kalam, that he himself, Sayyid Qutb, was infected with. Naam. And he mentions his misguidance and so on. Then the next paragraph he mentions that Imam al-Barbahari rahimahullah, he said, wa'alam rahimakallah. He said, and know, may Allah have mercy upon you, that there would not have been any heresy at all ever. No kufr, no doubt, no innovation, no misguidance, no confusion in the religion, except due to theological rhetoric. Except due to what the people use of their aql in opposition to the Kitab and the Sunnah and the philosophies that they found upon philosophies that are alien to Islam, and they counter the usul of the deen. He mentions that this ilmul kalam is khabith, it is foul. And those, meaning Ahlul Dalal, who instead of calling it what it is, and from them the Asha'ira, they call ilmul kalam, they call it usulud deen. They call it the foundations of the religion. He said, this is the usulud deen is shaitan. This is the foundations of the deen of shaitan. It is not the usul of the deen of Allah. It is rather the foundations of the usul of shaitan, the religion of shaitan, not the usul of the deen of Allah. And they are the usul of the religion of batil, of falsehood and futility. And they are not the usul of the Islamic religion. He said, the usul of the Islamic religion, the usulud deen fil Islam, the foundations of the religion in Islam, are the pillars of Iman and the pillars of Islam that have been textually stated in the book of Allah and textually reported from Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And the ulama of Islam, they know that. And the usul of Islam, they are the Quran and the Sunnah and the Ijma'. These are the foundations where the deen of Islam comes from. It is not from the philosophers and from misguidance. Because ilmul kalam, na'am, because ilmul kalam is nothing but philosophy. The philosophy that was taken from the Greeks. And they traverse upon it. Meaning, those Ahlul Kalam, they traverse upon Ilmul Kalam, which is actually the principles of the Greeks and the usul of the Greeks. They amalgamate it with Islam, and they traverse upon that due to their ignorance and their misguidance and their drowning in confusion and drowning in misguidance. And they name this knowledge which is actually knowledge which is corrupt and misguided, yet they call it usulud deen. It is not usulud deen. Barakallahu feekum. It is not the usul of the deen. So that should now be clear in your mind what we intend by Ahlul Kalam. Principles and ideas and argumentations and philosophies that are alien to Islam, brought into Islam, presented to you as principles of the religion, then they apply those principles in the religion. They say, Ya akhi, in the foundation of the religion, you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do that. Allah cannot speak, Allah cannot descend, Allah cannot ascend, because that will necessitate jism, and anything that has a jism is created. So they arrange, and when you try to tell them, no, this is not correct, then they bring in these principles that they took from the Greeks and from the kuffar. They bring them into Islam, and they try to logically, sequentially prove them to the people, and then the people become deceived by them, and then over decades and centuries and generations, that becomes in their eyes the usul of the deen. And it is not the usul of the deen. They are the usul of the deen of shaitan. They are the foundations of the religion of shaitan. Then in the last paragraph of Shaykh Rabi', he mentions that which we mentioned last week, which Shaykh Al-Fawzan did not go into detail with, because he had already gone into detail earlier. But this is a tremendous point that he mentions. وَأَهْلُ الْكَلَامِ وَالْجَدَلِ وَالْمِرَاءِ وَالْخُصُومَةِ. And the people of rhetoric and argumentation and disputation and controversy. He said, ilmul kalam, or the knowledge and the sciences of rhetoric and argumentation and debating and disputation and controversy. He said, all of these are the reason for kufr and heresy, zandaqa, and doubt, and other than that, from confusion and misguidance and so on. He said, as for al-khusuma, then this is to argue with falsehood upon falsehood. He said, because to debate with knowledge and proofs and evidences with the etiquette that has been laid down in the Sharia, laid down in the Islamic Sharia, then this is from the calling to Allah, the Blessed and Most High. So bear that in mind. And then he mentions the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَدْعُوا إِلَى سَبِيلِ رَبِّكَ بِالْحِكْمَةِ وَالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated, and call to the way of your Lord with wisdom, which is the sunnah, and with fair preaching, and argue with them in a manner that is best. Surah An-Nahl, ayah number 125. So he mentions, Shaykh Rabi', because he mentions, as we mentioned the statement before, because arguing, reasoned debate and reasoned arguing that is based upon knowledge, that is based upon proofs, that is based upon evidences, that is based upon the Islamic conduct and etiquette that has been laid down in the Islamic Sharia, then this is from calling to Allah, the Blessed and Most High. So if it reaches the point of disputation and controversy and so on and so forth, then leave it alone. Then leave him alone. Meaning, stay away from him. If he enters into that type of argumentation, controversy and disputation. Why? Because he said, because he has entered now into the door of disputation. He has entered through into the door of disputation. As for if your companion, the one that you are having a reasoned argument with, and he seeks the truth, and he is not stubbornly rebellious to the truth, and he is not haughty, and he does not argue upon falsehood, then this becomes an opportunity for you. So you argue with him with evidences and with the proofs of the Sharia, and in a manner and an etiquette that has been legislated in the Sharia. So therefore this is now from the wasail of da'wah. This is from the means of da'wah. Not like those who participate in play acting and dramas, and those who sing songs. No, not that, because they are not from the means of da'wah. But this argumentation, reasoned argument upon the proof and evidences, then that is from the means of da'wah. Because he said, because you are establishing the hujjah and the proofs through the course of this reasoned debate and reasoned discussion. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has stated in Surah Al-Ankabut, ayah number 46, وَلَا تُجَادِلُوا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And do not argue with the people of the book except with that which is good. So then Shaykh Rabi mentions the Jew and the Christian. It is possible that the Jew and the Christian aspires to Islam and desires it. So you bring to him the proofs and the evidences, and then he comes back and he brings to you certain doubts that he may have. So therefore you respond to him with further proofs and further evidences, and by way of that he enters into Islam. And there is no harm in this whatsoever. So he argues however, if he argues upon falsehood to falsify your religion in order to falsify the deen that you're upon, and he becomes arrogant and he becomes stubbornly rebellious, then no, do not enter with him into any argumentation. For this goal, if this is the goal, then argumentation is left. You do not argue with him. There is no reasoning or reasoned argument with such a person. As for the saying of the author, وَالْعُجْبِ and self-amazement, and how can a man embark upon debating and controversy and argumentation whilst Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, مَا يُجَادِلُ فِي آيَاتِ اللَّهِ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. And none disputes and argues concerning the verses of Allah except for those who disbelieve. Ghafir, ayah number 4. Meaning, Shaykh Rabi mentions that here, however, Shaykh Rabi mentions that this requires further investigation and looking into. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already revealed regarding the legislated, reasoned argumentation with the truth in the 2 ayahs that we have already mentioned. And we know the debate of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma with the Khawarij. And due to his debating with them, with the permission of Allah, as Abdul Razak has mentioned in his Musannaf, volume 10, in a narration that is authentic, that 20,000 of them returned back to the truth. There were initially 24,000 of the Khawarij who split away. And after the debate of Abdullah ibn Abbas, debate with them, 20,000 of them returned back. Why? Because he debated with them with a reasoned debate, upon knowledge, and with evidences, and with proofs, for a people who wanted to seek the truth, and they loved the truth, and they aspired to embrace the truth and return to it. So they returned back to it. He said, however, there are other people who are mu'anidun, that they are stubbornly rebellious. Then you are not to debate them. Because such an individual, he enters into blameworthy disputation and argumentation upon falsehood. So, this speech of Imam al-Barbahari is restricted with that which we have mentioned to you. And upon that, he finishes this particular chapter. Barakallahu feekum. So that is the decisive word, Barakallahu feekum, with regard to debate. Now, compare this kalam of Shaykh Rabi' and that which we have mentioned with the verses in the ayat regarding those people who argue not for the haqq, not to establish the haqq, but only for repute and notoriety. so that they may attain fame. And then the rabble, they watch them. Those weak-minded, weak-willed, weak in aql, weak in intellect, watch them, and they become the arbiters of haqq and batil. So now the crowds, they watch, whilst these two individuals debate and flirt with each other and praise each other, and that they flatter each other and they bootlick each other. And then the people are left with what? Look what Imam al-Barbahari said. That it does not increase, as Sheikh Rabi said, and Sheikh al-Fawzan said, it does not increase a person except in what? Except in further confusion. That they roam around the country looking for people to debate. This was not the way of the Salaf, barakallahu feekum. Traveling from city to city looking for people to debate with. And debate upon what? Upon batil, upon notoriety, to become famous. And what is apparent from the way that they behave is that's all they want. Televised, videoed, and then the rabble watch them, and the rabble decide what is haqq and batil, baying for blood. Is this the way that Ibn Abbas did it? They sit there praising them, flirting with each other, smiling in each other's faces, cracking jokes with each other, turning their religion into a joke. This is not the debating that is permitted in the religion. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And debate with them in the manner that is best, a reasoned debate, upon hujaj and barahin and ilm, with sidq and ikhlas, where it is known that everyone is seeking the truth. This is not what you see from these shayateen who come in the garbs of sunnah. Rather, they wage war against Ahlul Sunnah. And they raise the heads of Ahlul Bid'ah and the chiefs and the leaders of Ahlul Bid'ah. They are not establishing sunnah, they are establishing their own hizb and the heads of Bid'ah. But since they are teenagers and youth, then you find who's following them? Nothing but teenagers and youth. Rabble. Weak-minded, weak-willed, weak of resolve. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lift them out of their jahl and their ignorance and their misguidance. Do not be lambs to the slaughter. And when he leaves the flock, there is only a wolf waiting to devour him. So don't be devoured by them. The Salaf distinguished between that type of disputate or that type of debate which is reasoned, correct and sound, like the debate of Ibrahim alayhi salam with Nimrod, right? And the debate of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma with the Khawarij, and the debating of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and Shaykh al-Albani. You look at the difference. You see the ilm and the hujaj and the imams that are standing forward for this. Barakallah, not for notoriety and fame and self-promotion as you see from these individuals. And they themselves are juhal. A jahil, what's he going to give? He doesn't even know the foundations of debating. He doesn't even know the guidelines for debating. And he debates, humiliates himself, and then he claims, and then he tries to ascribe himself to the Sunnah and Salafiyah. And the thing is, the more that they shout that we did this in the name of Salafiyah, the more that we respond to them, by Allah, this is not in the name of Salafiyah. This is in your name and for your promotion. Because you have harmed yourselves and humiliated yourselves, and the da'wah still stands. With the scholars, with the jama'ah, with the elders, and with those who were around giving da'wah, when your umbilical cord wasn't even cut by the midwife.